This is the town of Mons in southern Belgium. Its city square and Gothic clock tower are much as they were when soldiers from the British Expeditionary Force arrived here on August the 22nd, 1914. Their goal was to stop, or at least delay, the German invasion of France. The BEF was positioned on the left side of the French Fifth Army. In front of it was the German First Army, the most powerful of the 5 German armies in the field that summer. It was commanded by General Alexander von Kluck. Ireland had long been a fertile recruitment ground for the British Army, despite all the differences between the two countries. This contemporary map shows the recruiting districts. In the north was the Inniskilling Fusiliers, the Royal Irish Rifles and the Royal Irish Fusiliers. The Connacht Rangers and Munster Fusiliers recruited from their own provinces. Leinster was served by the Leinster Regiment, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers and the Royal Irish Regiment in the southeast. 8 Irish infantry and 4 cavalry battalions were with the BEF that summer. Overall, some 15,000 Irish soldiers were part of the original BEF, an outfit that became known as the Old Contemptibles. One of the cavalry regiments was the 4th Irish Dragoon Guards. Early on the morning of August 22nd, they were carrying out a reconnaissance mission when they came across a German patrol. The troops followed the Germans down this road north of Mons. Colonel Edward Thomas from Neenah County, Tipperary, fired a shot in their direction, knocking a German cavalryman off his horse. It was the first shot fired by a British soldier in Western Europe since the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and the first of this new war. That event is commemorated here. This canal outside Mons was the front line in the first battle between the German and British armies in the war. At a bend in the canal are 2 bridges, Auberge on the right and Nemi Bridge on the left. It was at Nemi Bridge that the first Victoria Cross of the war was won, and it was won by an Irishman. Lieutenant Maurice Dees from Cool County, Westmeath, was in charge of a machine gun company section with the 4th Fusiliers. Their mission was to hold Nemi Bridge. They held up 2 battalions of German infantry for several hours. In doing so, they also made themselves a target. This painting by the war artist David Rowlands is based on eyewitness accounts. Lieutenant Dees continued to hold his position when most of his section were killed or injured. In doing so, he was mortally wounded and died that day. His place was taken by Private Sid Godley, who also won the VC. The BEF was outnumbered 2-1, but it had a potent weapon in the hands of men who could use it, the Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle. British infantry were trained to fire the rifle 15 times a minute, known as the Mad Minute. It was a weapon capable of stopping a whole army, as Gay Byrne recently found out.
If that hit you at 600 yards...
It would put you on the deck. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. It really did a nasty job.
One of the best eyewitness accounts of the Battle of Mons was written by John Lucy from Cork, a sergeant with the Royal Irish Rifles. In his war memoir, The Devil is in the Drum, he wrote a brutally unsentimental account of how the German tactics of advancing in close formation played into the hands of entrenched British infantry.
Our rapid fire was appalling, even to us, and the worst marksman couldn't miss, as he had only to fire into the brown of the masses of the unfortunate enemy, who on the fronts of 2 of our companies were continually and uselessly reinforced at the short range of 300 yards. Such tactics amazed us, and after the first shock of seeing men slowly and helplessly falling down as they were hit, gave us a great sense of power and pleasure. It was all so easy.
Though they inflicted huge losses on the Germans, the BEF was eventually overwhelmed and forced to retreat. The Germans entered Mons that evening, and the danger for the BEF was not over. Somebody had to cover the retreat. That somebody was Quartermaster Sergeant Thomas William Fitzpatrick from Cork. At around 1:30 p.m, he gathered 50 cooks, drivers and storemen from the 2nd Royal Irish Regiment together, and they held this critical crossroad. Their action stopped the advancing Germans for several hours, but at a terrible cost. Their stand is marked by this Celtic cross. For his actions, Sergeant Fitzpatrick received medals for bravery from the British, French and Russian governments. The retreat from Mons, with a rampant German army in close pursuit, was slow and dangerous. At a true 80 kilometres south of Mons, the 2nd Munster Fusiliers were involved in a celebrated rearguard stand against a force 6 times their number of advancing German infantry. The Munsters fought for 14 hours against superior numbers before being cornered in an orchard where this Celtic cross was erected after the war. Some 158 were killed and 444 taken prisoner, but their actions allowed the 1st Division of the BEF to continue its retreat. In September 1914, a fictional story appeared in a London newspaper. During the retreat from Mons, British soldiers were reported to have seen bowmen from the Battle of Agincourt in the sky overhead, holding the Germans at bay as they sought to escape overwhelming odds. So began one of the great enduring myths of the First World War, the Angel of Mons. Many of the dead from Mons are buried here in St. Symphorion's Cemetery. It is one of the few cemeteries on the Western Front where British and German soldiers are buried together, in this case side by side. The Royal Irish Regiment bore the brunt of the German assault that day, suffering 300 casualties, including around 100 dead. For most of these soldiers, their first day in combat would also be their last. St. Symphorion's Cemetery contains the grave of the first British soldier killed in the war, Private John Parr, the last British soldier to die, Private George Ellison, and the last Commonwealth soldier to die, Private George Price, killed at 2 minutes to 11 on Armistice Day. Compared to the carnage that was to follow, casualties on both sides during the Battle of Mons were relatively light, some 5,000 Germans and 1,600 British in total, but they were still terrible by other standards. This would be a war of scarcely believable slaughter. At 5 a.m. on the morning of November 11th, 1918, the town of Mons was liberated by Canadian soldiers aided by the 5th Royal Irish Lancers, and a plaque in Mons Town Hall commemorates that fact. The Canadian soldiers marched forward back down this road again. At 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month, they stopped here. Across the road is the place 4 years previously where Colonel Edward Thomas had fired the first shot. The distance from there to here is a matter of meters, but it can be measured in millions of lives.